All right, we are ready to roll. Well, aloha and welcome everyone. Thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate your presence for our presentation. My name is Deborah Green, and I'm the founding director of Safe Tech Hawaii, and I'm very honored to be co-hosting this event with the Venerable Cece Doucette. So I'm going to talk first for a little bit, share some of my story, and then I'm going to turn it over to Cece for her to bestow her wisdom upon you. My PhD is from Ohio State University, and my background is in energy medicine. And it's not energy in terms of like nuclear power or solar power. It's energy in terms of human energy. And basically, we study what affects the human energy flow, what impacts it, what enhances it, what restricts it or inhibits it, these energy flows in our body, and also what disorganizes our energy systems and so forth. And what I knew from my background in energy medicine was that exposure to electromagnetic radiation or wireless radiation has a very negative impact on the human biofield. And so with that background and knowledge and awareness, I knew that the results are not very pretty. And back in 2012, I was living in Maui Meadows, and my very own neighborhood was chosen as a pilot project for smart meters. And the utility at that time, Maui Electric, was heavily promoting smart meters because their goal was to get 200 households signed up voluntarily for these fantastic smart meters. And nobody was speaking out against this. And so I dove into the research. And since energy medicine is kind of considered to be an alternative approach, I wanted to know, what is the rigorous mainstream conventional science on this, peer-reviewed journal science. And I was shocked to find out that there is a lot of research showing the detrimental effects of wireless radiation. And so I organized a group of people, and we became very active. We showed up at meetings, we asked difficult questions, we held sign wavings, we ended up enacting a notice of liability process. And we also collaborated with Josh Del Sol, who's the director and producer of the award-winning documentary Take Back Your Power. And I did some fundraising, and so was able to purchase 600 DVD copies of Josh's documentary expose. And then I recruited 40 volunteers, and we went door to door in Maui Meadows. There were 600 households at that time. So we went door to door, and we gave every person a free DVD of Josh's film and an information packet about the negative health effects from wireless radiation, particularly smart meters. And as I mentioned, the utility's goal was to get 200 households signed up for the smart meters. And in the end, they ended up with only 44. So, we considered that a success. And an interesting thing is that because it was a pilot project, the results of it were supposed to be, touted. And in fact, the results of that pilot project were never made public. So we have a feeling that it probably didn't go very well, or at least it didn't go the way that they wanted it to. So we were just sort of recovering from, those efforts when 5G arrived on the scene, and then realized, okay, we have to get active again. And, I call myself an accidental activist because, I didn't plan on any of this. It just sort of, I saw the need, and I realized that I needed to do something. And so our efforts to stop 5G on Maui were quite successful. We were able to stop 2 5G towers, and then in Maui County, the island of Kauai was met with this giant drone proposal, which is a story in itself. You can read about it actually on our website, safetechhawaii.com. We're talking about football field sized drones that were, going to be beaming down wireless radiation and so forth. So we got very active and played a crucial role in stopping the giant drones. And then our coalition expanded beyond Maui County to other islands, and we ended up changing our name to Safe Tech Hawaii. We started out as Keep Your Power. And then we got a resolution passed in Hawaii County that is basically a moratorium on 5G until it can be proven safe. And I should clarify that because it's a resolution, it doesn't have legal teeth. It's not a law. It's a resolution. But it is a very, very important first step in stopping this technology. And we've done all kinds of things. Every election in Hawaii for the past several years, we have put together voter guides, and we do that by utilizing what I refer to as my phone angels, again, volunteers calling all of the candidates and polling them, asking them about their stand on 5G and finding out if they're familiar with the dangers of wireless radiation and so forth. And then we publish the results in our voter guides so that people, when they go to the polls, can make a more informed choice of candidate if they're concerned about this issue, which in my opinion, everybody should be. And you can see the voter guides on our website as well, safetechhawaii.com. We also had this very ambitious project of testing the radiation coming off of towers and antennas, on the Hawaiian Islands. And to do this, it was more fundraising. We raised money to buy the Safe and Sound Pro 2 meters. And then off we went into the field, testing these towers and antennas and documenting our results so that people can have a sense of what they're being exposed to if you live in proximity to towers or antennas. And again, you can find those, the results posted on our website, safetechhawaii.com. So there's more that we've done, but I'll stop there. Please join us, in our coalition if you live in Hawaii. And even though we've done all kinds of things, all of this pales by comparison to what Cece Doucette has done, my co-host. She has accomplished so much. I could spend the rest of our webinar singing her praises. I'll try to contain myself. Cece is the director of Massachusetts for Safe Technology, and she's responsible for introducing legislation in Massachusetts that helped her schools become the first in the nation to begin safeguarding students, teachers, and staff from wireless technology, which is so important. She's also an invited lecturer at the AMF Medical Conference. And she's so involved in this issue that I bow to you, Cece.
No.
Her knowledge is encyclopedic. Her efforts are tireless, and I'm so honored to be co-hosting with her today. So take it away, Cece.
Deborah, right back at you. I am just so inspired. Like you said, you're an accidental activist. I had no idea that I would be sitting here presenting about wireless risks and safer technology solutions. That's certainly not what I ever trained for, but I have such respect because when we see these kind of problems coming at us, it's just so inspiring to learn what you've done, and that will inspire others. And that's what we all do. We just kind of step off of one another's successes and keep going, or even the failures. How did we do it? What could we do better? And just keep moving. So thank you. If I had understood 10 years ago what you figured out so quickly, I would have gone to the grassroots much sooner. So I've gone all the way up to Washington, D.C. and back down again, all the way to the state agencies, and they've done nothing to protect us. So I think that you were onto it from the beginning, that the power lies with the people, and the people have to care enough to to actually do something. So thank you from the bottom of my heart. I went through high school in Hawaii, and it holds a very dear place in my heart still. I have a lot of loved ones there. And when I went on your website and I looked at those reports that you did island by island, they've actually put up cell towers on the very street that I lived on in high school. So, so I pray that you guys succeed with all your efforts there for everybody that I know. And it's such a beautiful island, and the flora and the fauna, and oh my goodness, we've got a lot of work to do, but it's good work. So let me go ahead and do a screen share. And I'll work from a set of slides tonight that, let me just make a couple of quick adjustments here. So Deborah, can you give me a nod if you can see my slides? Okay, perfect. All right, so we're going to send the slides and the video back to everybody who registered for the webinar today so that you can go in and just dive into the areas that interest you. I always say, don't take our word on anything. Get to know this for yourself. So once you really understand it, that will help you find the courage to do something about the way you're using your technology today, and then perhaps branch out into your community. So we'll send you the slides. And this MTPW after my name just means I had the privilege of earning a master's of technical and professional writing from Northeastern University. And that's also where I did my undergrad in communication studies. And I never imagined that I'd be using my skill set to do what I do today, but I'm so very grateful that I can. So as Deborah mentioned, we became the first public school district in the United States to even have these best practices for mobile devices hanging in our classroom. And, you know, turn off the devices when you're not using them. Otherwise, they're pulsating microwave radiation all the time. Turn off the Wi-Fi and the access points and the routers when we're not using them. Otherwise, they're pulsating microwave radiation all the time. And then always place a radiating device on a solid surface, because if you put it on top of your body, as we'll learn when we look at the science, that brings great risk. And, you know, when I was a little kid, my mom always used to say, stand back from the TV. And she knew that there was an electric and magnetic field coming off of that screen that was greater than what our body's own electromagnetic field is. And so she cautioned us to not stand right in front of the television set. So with all of our wireless devices, creating distance from our screens is a really good idea. So we became the first in 2014 to even have this sign in our classrooms. And I will tell you, it was not an easy conversation to have. I went in, started sharing the science, and I thought that they would respond as if we had had a gas leak in the science lab at school, get the kids and the teachers out of the building, clear the area, get rid of the radiation, and then bring everybody back in. You know, as a mom, that's what I would have done. But that's not at all what happened. We found out that the industry had already gotten in at the state level. They had embedded all of this technology into the curriculum. So if our schools weren't cooperating with the state curriculum mandates, then that could impact their funding, and their jobs were on the line. So that explained why when we went in front of our school committee, they looked at us like deer in the headlights, because everybody had been pushed into this technology with not one shred of safety information. So it was pretty cool that we actually got to become the first in the nation to even do this. But I realized it was just a sign, and we weren't actually turning this stuff off and protecting everybody in our buildings. So then I had been the president of our local education foundation, and I had served alongside our state senator. So I went to local coffee hours with our senator, and I said, Senator Spilka, you know, look at this science. Look at this little sign we've got in our classrooms. And I had a meter, and I could show her the radiation. And I measured the radiation coming off of her cell phone and her district director's laptop. Both devices went right off the charts into the red zone on the meter. And they're looking at me like, really? And I said, yes. Is there anything from where you sit that we could simply give the public the right to know. Because oftentimes, once we know better, we can choose to do better. So she put me with an attorney in her office, and we crafted a very simple bill that would form a commission to get the right minds together at the state level, investigate this issue, and decide what to do. Well, I will tell you, we have had bills in Massachusetts for 10 years now, and I've worked my tail off alongside others here. And we've gotten them voted favorably out of committee a number of times, but they have yet to pass anything into law. So for 10 years, we have not been protecting our children, our adults, our pollinators, our trees, our bees. The whole thing is impacted by this man-made radiation. But, and we'll walk you through this a little bit later, we had the opportunity to educate a really good legislator up in New Hampshire. And long story short, in 7 months' time, we got his bill past the House, past the Senate, and under the governor's pen, signed into law that they had to form a commission to investigate 5G. And once they started looking, they realized it's not just 5G, it's all wireless tech. So there are great things happening in the background that we simply don't hear about otherwise. So that's why we're doing these presentations, is to help everybody learn and then see what we can do to fix it. So on this journey, I've had the privilege of connecting with people all over the world and many of the world's leading scientists and doctors. And a few of us have formed this little nonprofit called Wireless Education. The gentleman who brought me in on this was from the UK, and he was a technologist, and his job was to put wireless systems into these huge construction projects in the UK. And he had a couple of little girls and a wife, and somehow it came across his desk that the American Academy of Environmental Medicine had put out a position statement to school superintendents back in 2012 saying, please do not allow wireless into the schools. It's hazardous. And so Brett's looking at this going, what is that? And Brett went and did the deep dive into the science and went, whoa, I'm a technologist. I know how to fix this. It's not rocket science to just run cables back to your technology and turn off the wireless. And then he quickly recognized that you can't fix it because nobody even knows we've got a problem here. So he identified that we need to get the education out in front of this. And he invited me in. He invited one of the world's leading scientists, Dr. Mikko Ahonen from Finland. And Brett's wife, Lynn, was a PR marketing person. And so the four of us hit it hard for about 6 months. And we developed this little wireless education course, off-the-shelf training. We could literally train your entire school district, your municipality, your workforce, literally in about a half an hour online. So please know that for every problem we've created, we now have the solutions to fix it. So we are at a far distant pace from where Deborah and I fell down the rabbit hole more than a decade ago. We have so many amazing resources that we're going to share with you tonight. So somebody saw what I had done with the schools here and reached out to me and said, hey, Cece, there's going to be a panel of experts at our state house who are coming in to talk about this. And I went, really? Because for the first 2 years on my journey, I was the only person I could talk to about this. And honestly, I wasn't even really sure what I was talking about at that point. So to be able to go down to Beacon Hill in Boston and go into the State House and have a standing room only crowd all there to talk about wireless radiation risks, I felt like a kid in a candy store. It was organized by Dr. Devra Davis, who's the founder and chair of or president of the Environmental Health Trust, which is arguably the world's largest think tank and database on this topic. She brought with her the retired president of Microsoft Canada, Frank Clegg. She brought Dr. R.S. Sharma from India. And Dr. Sharma is a scientist, and he had done some of the studies that showed this very severe harm. And India's public radiation limits were way up here where ours are still in North America. And in India, at least on paper, they have brought it down 90%. They're still in the throes of figuring out how to get around industry to actually start protecting the public and the environment. But it at least showed us that with some political will, we can make serious inroads. So we had other expert presenters on there, and it was just so gratifying to be listening to these world-leading experts telling us that, yeah, we have gotten ourselves into quite a bit of hot water here, but there are solutions. So that's what we're going to focus on tonight. We're going to teach you the risks and the science, and then we're going to talk about solutions. So oh, and I just want to say, my website and Deborah's website are provided at the end of our slides, and we both have a lot of really highly credible information that you can get at very quickly to get to the facts that you may want to share with others. So somebody down at the National Institutes of Health found my work and asked if I would come down and co-chair the technology panel for the Health in Buildings Roundtable Conference. So this was a conference of professionals from all different sectors. We had government agencies. We had the green authorizing organizations. We had hospitals. We had urban planners. We had architects. All these people who are trying to ensure that we are safe from environmental pollutants in our indoor spaces. And this was the first time that they brought in a panel to talk about wireless radiation. And for many of these folks who are high up in their careers, it was the first time they were hearing about this topic. So I like to share this link because if you are wanting to give somebody a highly credible source that they can digest quickly, this NIH one is a good one. All of our talks had to be 10 minutes or less. So Frank Clegg from Microsoft Canada flew in. He is a captain of industry and he's retired now, but he was saying, I was in this industry for years and I had no idea these wireless risks were there until some of the scientists taught him. So he came to tell us that industry can absolutely do better if given a nudge, and that's where we have to help get that nudge. We had Dr. Martin Pall, who's one of the world's leading scientists on this, telling us what the mechanisms of harm, because for years the industry spun it like, oh, there's no mechanism of harm identified. Let's just keep doing what we're doing. So Dr. Pall talks us through the science. We had Theodora Scarato, who's the executive director of the Environmental Health Trust, and she came to inspire us with inroads that have been made in other countries where schools are taking wireless out of the classroom because of the health risks and other policy inroads that are being made around the world. And then we had Peter Sullivan. And I had come across Peter's work through a lecture he gave online. And Peter used to be a fighter pilot, Top Gun, that was Peter. And then when he got out, he is an engineer and he went to work in Silicon Valley. So his friends were like the folks who invented cell phones. So he's kind of been a big deal his whole life. But he started getting really sick. And as a fighter pilot, he's way up there in the high levels of the Earth's electromagnetic fields inside of a plane that has radar mounted on it. And then inside the plane with all this instrumentation that also has all these man-made electromagnetic fields. So Peter wound up, and he's a tech guy, so he had all the gadgets and stuff of his own. And living out in Silicon Valley, where there's a lot of radiation in the community. So Peter's health started crashing. He started dropping weight. His teeth started getting very brittle and breaking off. And then when his two little boys, each of them, as they came up through the preschool years, they both wound up on the autism spectrum. And so Peter's done a lot of work in the autism community. And when I was listening to him, he was saying that there's something called de novo mutations, which means autism didn't come from mom's bloodline. It didn't come from dad's bloodline. It came from somewhere in the environment. So Peter did what a lot of parents will do. They'll shift their family over to a clean organic diet, so you're no longer eating chemical-based foods. He actually went so far as to do the heavy metal detox because all of these environmental pollutants store heavy metals in our bodies and in our brains, and that can have a big effect. But he says, today, knowing what I know and what I've seen in my own family, I recommend that families do a 12-hour at night digital detox and create a clean, safe sleeping environment so that the body can do proper cell repair and regeneration while we sleep. So that was eye-opening for me. I didn't know that autism could actually be helped. And we don't want to overpromise anything because everybody's body is individually very different. But it is very encouraging when we hear these real life stories that are then backed up with science and teach us how it can be that somebody can actually improve or even get off the autism spectrum. So feel free to use these links and share because our talks there are very short. Now, one of the major gaps we had around the time that Deborah and I fell down the rabbit hole with this issue is we could see people were getting very sick and they would go to their doctors and their doctors would run the tests they know to run and come up empty. So then people wind up paying thousands of dollars out of pocket to go see a specialist who runs their tests and comes up empty and says, well, you must be fine. And you're over there going, I am so not fine. I've got a lot of issues going on here. And in worst case scenarios, kind of like where we were with Lyme disease more than a decade ago, some doctors, because they've never been trained to recognize radio frequency, electromagnetic field, microwave radiation sicknesses, they'll say, oh, gee, it must all be in your head, which is the worst thing you can tell somebody who's suffering from an environmental illness. So we were so grateful that back in 2019, Dr. Lynn Patrick organized the first EMF or electromagnetic fields conference. And then 2 years later, Elizabeth Kelly organized the second International EMF Medical Conference. So just to review some of those alphabet soup terms, EMF stands for electromagnetic fields. These are the fields of the pulses of microwave radio frequency radiation that comes off of all of our wireless technology. So you'll hear it called EMF, sometimes EMR for electromagnetic radiation. Sometimes you'll call it microwave sickness or microwave illness. But it all comes down to there is no safe level of man-made radio frequency radiation in the scientific literature. So we're going to teach you tonight about the science and the risks and what you can do with your own stuff. And then we'll cover a little bit about the exposures that you may not have control over and give you resources so that you can start addressing those in your own communities. So that's how I got involved in all of this. And then I think what actually got my schools to become the first in the nation to even have that little sign hanging in our classrooms was when they read the legal fine print that comes with all of our devices. So anybody who's watching with us now, if you have an iPhone, I invite you to take that out and go into your settings. And while you get that organized, I'll just talk a little bit more. Our friends at the Environmental Health Trust have put up this webpage called See the Fine Print, where they've taken a lot of the different devices that we commonly use today and pulled out these fine print disclaimers. So look at this one for the Apple iPad. It had been in there all along in the earlier days saying, this can cause seizures and blackouts and eye strain. And I know of 2 families in towns next to me where the children had their first seizures while on the iPad. So pretty serious stuff. So from an iPhone, in your settings, scroll down just a little ways and hit General. From General, scroll all the way down to the bottom and hit Legal and Regulatory. On the next screen, about 4 down, you'll see RF Exposure. So settings, general, legal and regulatory, and then RF exposure. Here we are now buried 4 or 5 levels down in your phone where we can read the fine print. And early on, it says that this device was tested at a distance from the body. So if you're tucking it in your bra or your suit pocket or your shirt pocket, or you're tucking it in the waistband of your yoga pants or sticking it in your back pocket, you are exceeding the government Federal Communication Commission's public radiation exposure limits, which, by the way, were never tested for biological safety. They only put those really high limits out based on heat. How much heat would it take to raise the temperature of your skin in a half an hour of exposure to this? Well, what about if we're exposed longer than a half an hour? And what about non-thermal effects? You don't have to have heat to have harm from this stuff, but our government has never owned up to that. So it's telling you right there, don't put this anywhere near your body. And in fact, in the subsequent paragraph, it says to reduce your exposure, don't touch it. They say use a hands-free option, like a headset or speakerphone. And you'll notice that Deborah has a headset on right now, but she's chosen hardwired technology with nothing radiating. She has everything run through wires with all the antennas turned off. So, you know, she's walking the talk over there. So yeah, don't touch a radiating device. It's pretty common sense once we know that's what's making the data fly is microwave radiation. So I'm going to stop the screen share for a couple of minutes, and I want to give you some other insights. So if you have to use a radiating device and you have to use a headset, so again, for everything we've broken, we have solutions today. And this is one called a hollow tube or an air tube headset. And it's got a really long cord, so you can plug it into your device and then set your device as far away from you as you can. You know, don't stick it on your body. And then one of the properties of microwave radiation is it amplifies with metal. So if you've got a wire, a metal wire, running straight up to your brain, you're setting yourself up for some prospective damage there. So with a hollow tube or an air tube headset, you still have the wire. It goes up to volume control and muting and stuff. But then the wire ends at these little ferrite beads. These little beads break the radiation from traveling any further. And then the acoustics go into a hollow tube. Nothing but rubber here. I saw one that had magnets right here so you could hang it around your neck. And I thought, well, that's really cool. Until it clicked in my little brain that you're putting a magnet up to your head, and that magnet is going to draw the ambient radiation right into your brain. So you don't want to have metal up to your head if there's anything radiating around you. So look for something called a hollow tube or an air tube headset. And then you can use technology a little more safely. We don't want to kid ourselves. There's no safe level of man-made radiation in the scientific literature. So one of the things that had my mind bent is that it's invisible. And then I learned there are devices that allow us to measure this radiation. This is a radio frequency broadband detection meter that was recommended at the EMF Medical Conference. And there's a doctor here in Massachusetts who got the meter. It's about $400. And she loans it to her patients for $10 and says, okay, you've got 2 hours. Go home, do your scavenger hunt, write down what you've got and what the numbers are, and come back and I will teach you how to use it safely. So here in my house, once I stopped circling my tail, and, you know, I didn't just say, oh, I'm going to fix this right now. I was like, you gotta be kidding me, right? I mean, I had decked cordless phones all over my house. We had laptops, we had cell phones, we had microwave radiation ovens. So I circled my tail for a while until I studied it enough to convince myself, whoa, I'm the mom, it's my job. I got to get this stuff under control. So here in my house, knowing what I know, as this boots up, all the lights go on and then it settles down to the range where I'm in the green. And that's as low as I can reasonably achieve in my home. Right now, I'm at 2 microwatts per square meter. That's the unit of measurement. So basically within about 3 feet of air, how much radiation are we exposed to? In the scientific literature, in our sleeping areas, they want us to be at 10 or less. So 10 microwatts or less. So I'm gonna take my cell phone out of airplane mode. And what they don't tell us is that they give us these devices with multiple antennas. Multiple antennas radiating, cellular, data, Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, locator, hotspot. And for anybody who didn't know any better, whoa, hang on, I'm gonna go back into, oh, there we went. All right. I went right back into airplane mode and notice how it drops right off. So what did that just measure? We were at two microwatts. This just maxed out my meter at 3,180,000 microwatts per square meter from one device, 3 million. And we want to be at 10 or less. So we have just been sold a bill of goods by the wireless industry with all their promotion of convenience and fast streaming and downloads and super highways and all of this cool stuff without telling us that we are doing some pretty serious damage. So I'm going to go back into my screen share and we'll continue on with the slides. And in a minute, we're going to show you the actual science. So Deborah, can you see my screen again? All right, thanks. So my brain goes right towards solutions. When I learned there were devices that could measure this radiation, I thought, wow, we've got a little grant fund in our town. Let me submit an application to our board of select persons and see if I can get a grant to put one of these meters in the library and then one in the schools. We can all do our gap analysis, take measurements, and then fix it, right? So I write up my application and include the science, and I give it over to our select board, and they read it and they're like, what is this? They had no idea what it was. And they went, oh, we don't really know about this. Come back next time. So 6 months later, I resubmit my application and they go, whoa, well, this is probably more of a Board of Health issue. So they denied my application again. And I'd already met with the health agent in our town. And he had been around back in the 90s when industry was first bringing in the cell towers. And industry literally came in and took our municipal agents out to fancy hotels and wined and dined them to get them all excited about letting these cell towers into their communities. And they said, and by the way, if anybody starts saying anything about potential harm to the environment, we're sorry. The Telecom Act of 1996 says you can't sue us if there's any harm. So we see that happening across other big industries that are doing nefarious things in our world today. But that's what they do. They get up there in DC, they have deep pockets and high lobbying power, and most of our public servants have no idea what they're really doing because they own mainstream media too, so we don't get the messaging. So I knew our Board of Health didn't know anything about this. And so that's when I thought, I better go talk to my senator. And so I met with Senator Spilka. She put me with an attorney in her office, and we crafted one of these simple bills to form a commission. So I wind up going to the State House to testify on this bill before the Joint Committee on Public Health. And I'm showing the science, and I'm showing, Ashland's little sign, and I'm showing the radiation with a meter. And as I looked into the eyes of every member of the Joint Committee on Public Health, I could tell not one of them knew this issue even existed. And I went, whew, this 3-minute testimony is not going to cut it. So I spent literally years going up to the State House and one by one educating every legislator who had a hand on any of our bills here. So I always started every conversation with, can you help me understand what you might know about the biological effects of today's wireless technology? And literally hundreds of interviews and meetings I had, except for one person, all of them said, well, until you brought this to my attention, I didn't even know there was an issue here. And the one guy who said, I know a little bit about this. Why don't you just tell me what you came here to tell me? And so he gave me 40 minutes of his time. And by the time I finished presenting the facts, he confided in me that his dad was the physicist who brought the team into Chernobyl after it blew. So this gentleman grew up around man-made radiation and understood it. He was the only one at our state house that I came across that did. So that's how new this conversation is to most people. So I learned from that that you really need to talk to people one-on-one. There's no cavalry coming. Nobody's coming to fix this for us. So that's when I doubled back to my town and I asked for a one-on-one meeting with every member of our government, our select board, our school committee members. And then I resubmitted my application, and it was still uncertain enough for them that they didn't give me a grant for 2 meters. They gave me a conditional grant for 1 meter under the condition that our library agreed to take it into circulation. So then I had to go meet with our library board of trustees. And there were 5 members, and one older gentleman sat there with his arms crossed like this, just throwing eye daggers at me. And, you know, he just had hogwash written all over his face. And then another one said, wow, I want to get that meter and take it home and see what's going on in my house. And a third one said, you know, regardless of how we feel personally, as a library, we are a conduit of information for our community. So let's take a vote. And they voted 4-1 to bring this meter into circulation. And so that became a pilot program, and others around the country have been doing this. And it makes us feel really good because now we can make the invisible visible. So people take this out of my library for a week or two, they loan it to their friends and their family, and then everybody can start seeing what this toxin really is. So other communities have done this. At the first medical conference, I flew all the way out to California for that, only to meet a doctor from Massachusetts in Newton. And she and I came back and went after a grant from our state cultural council. We got that grant and put one on loan in her library and did some programming with that film Generation Zapped that Deborah talked about. And then in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, Verizon put up a cell tower illegally right on top of a neighborhood. And before too long, 17 children and adults got so sick. These little girls were vomiting in their bed. Their dog was vomiting. The mom got sick. People whose cancer had been in remediation came back, and at least one has since died. Insomnia, skin problems, gut problems, ringing in the ears, headaches, you know, just the whole 9 yards of what we know what happens when we microwave ourselves. And so Pittsfield Library put out the $400 from their own budget to get one of these meters and put it on loan. And so today it's not a really big ask. Most of our libraries are having to reinvent themselves because books are no longer the only way that people access that kind of information. So with technology, a lot of people are just downloading stuff and they don't even come into the library anymore. So we're losing that opportunity for community building. So libraries are reinventing themselves. And many today have a library of things. Like my daughter's on a wait list to get a power washer at her library. And what library has a power washer? But they've got games and puzzles and equipment and all this stuff that anybody with a library card can borrow. So it's no longer a big deal to go to your library and say, hey, other libraries are doing this. Can we please get a radio frequency detection meter? And if the library budget is sound, then they'll probably do it right out of pocket. Or some said, well, gosh, we could put 200 toward that, but not 400. So maybe somebody in the community will match that. In other cases, citizens who had the means just outright donated one to the library. And then if any library has a hardship, if the librarian contacts the Environmental Health Trust, they have a small grant fund that if the librarian contacts them, we can't contact them as citizens, but if the librarian does, they may have funding to help your library get one on loan too. So lots of great solutions. And what I've learned on this journey is where we used to have like 50 independent media outlets in mainstream media, those have been bought up and bought up and bought up. And now we're left with the same 4 to 6 mega conglomerate corporations that now own all of mainstream media, and they control the messaging that you and I receive. So, have a little game for yourself. Sit down and watch TV primetime for an hour and see how many ads you see from telecom. That's who controls the messaging. That's why we don't hear about the science when it comes out. But our local cable stations are oftentimes the last bastion of independent reporting in our communities. So they are tickled when residents come up to them and say, hey, I have an idea. You want to help me do a program? And so my local cable station has had me do a lot of different public service announcements. And one of them, they came into my home with a cameraman, and we just did a walkthrough of all the common exposures of radio frequency radiation from all of our devices. We featured my hardwired computer, my printer, my microwave oven. Ooh, you wouldn't believe how far that thing leaked through my house. The decked cordless phones, the laptops, all of it. And then we made suggestions for how you could start reducing those exposures. So feel free to see that public service announcement. I had been brought in as a guest in Worcester, Massachusetts over the years a number of times to talk about wireless radiation. And the manager there last year said, hey, Cece, I think it's time you just have your own show. And I went, really? And he said, yeah. So they've reserved a slot for me. Every couple of weeks, I go into their studio and I invite a guest to join me either in person or by Zoom. And we have 28 minutes to tell our stories and to share what's happening around the world and in our communities. So I would love it if others are active in their communities. I'd love to share your story, because then you have something that you can then share in your community, and I'll share it out with my list too. So Deborah, I'm going to ask you to join me for an episode on Tech Safe one of these days too. So just know we have some fresh content coming up, every month. Okay, so again, don't take our word on any of this. Let's look at the science and see what it's telling us. Child and adult cancers. 2 decades ago, there was enough evidence of harm mounting that our Food and Drug Administration commissioned the U.S. National Toxicology Program to investigate, and they thought they would go in and find out that cell phones are fine, because cell phones were the technology of the day back then with 2G and 3G. That just means second and third generation. About every 10 years, we get a new generation. So they went in and did the science. And you can't do the science on humans. We have international laws that prevent that. So they use rodents. And these Sprague Dawley rats, what happens to them happens to adults or humans as well. So they use these rodents. And at the end of the day, they had an unprecedented 3-day peer review of this study at the National Institutes of Health. Largest peer review they've ever done with actual experts who specialize in man-made radiation. And they concluded clear evidence of cancerous tumors and DNA damage. Now, clear evidence is the highest of 5 categories they can assign. Clear evidence of cancers and DNA damage. That should have triggered public policy to protect you and I. Well, every time one of these good studies comes out, the industry gets a hold of it, and they've got the megaphone out to the public, and they'll say, oh, that was just one study, and they'll bury it. Well, right on the heels of our American study, the Ramazzini Institute in Italy came out with another large study on the cell tower base station. So we did the phones, they did the towers, and guess what? They found the same damage that our study found. So they corroborated the cancers and the DNA damage and more. So we don't need more science. We need public policy to protect us. So DNA damage, as we know, DNA is our roadmap to grow a proper anything from a human to a plant to a pollinator to a tree, everything that grows has DNA, and this is harmful to all of that. So it was the infertility studies that got me on my feet. I had watched Dr. Deborah Davis give a presentation, so I went looking for the science. And oddly enough, you don't even have to scratch the surface very far to find literally thousands of studies all over the world showing this harm. And when I started reading the fertility studies, they have taken male human sperm, and Dr. Sharma from India had done some of these studies. They had taken male human sperm and exposed it to a laptop with the antennas radiating, and it changed the DNA. It slowed the motility of the sperm, and it caused apoptosis or programmed cell death, which means it was killing the sperm in 4 hours of exposure. And that was the day I found my voice, because we had just sent our daughter off to college, our oldest girl, with her MacBook, which of course she's using right on top of her reproductive organs. Our youngest had just gone into high school, and we didn't know any better. For Christmas, we gave her a laptop, thinking we'd give her a leg up in high school. And she, of course, was using it right on top of her reproductive organs. And now we have even more fertility studies. Kaiser Permanente put out a really good one on higher miscarriage rates for women who are using wireless tech. And all these studies have been repeated and corroborated, so the science is solid. And then neurotoxicity. So even before the pandemic, we were at epidemic levels of anxiety and depression. We were seeing suicidal ideation among children and adults like we've never seen before. And now we know more scientifically about what is happening to the brain when we radiate it. So Dr. Hugh Taylor runs the OBGYN program at Yale Medical School, and he did some of these rodent studies. And he found that when they exposed the pregnant mice to cell phone radiation, when the pups were born, they started bouncing off the walls of the cage, not a care in the world, no focus, attention. It looked like a child with ADD or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. So we've got the science on that. Dr. Martha Herbert founded the Autism Research Lab here at Massachusetts General Hospital, and she was seeing huge connections between the families in her care and what we know scientifically happens with microwave radiation exposure. And she is a Harvard pediatric neurologist. She's retired now, but so Yale, Harvard, we've got, our nation's leading scientists on this, but the messages just aren't getting to the public. And then Alzheimer's, much like cancers that would develop over 2 or 3 decades, we are now seeing Alzheimer's come on, not just in 70, 80, 90-year-olds, but in 60-year-olds and 50s and 40s and 30s, and even in rare cases, people in their 20s are getting diagnosed with Alzheimer's. Seriously, how long can we continue to pollute the environment of the brain and expect that everything's going to be fine? So Dr. Om Gandhi is one of the scientists, and he did the modeling to show us how deep into our brain a cell phone radiation penetrates. So these head models up here are turned sideways. The yellow dot is the ear. So when an adult holds a cell phone up to our brain, it's radiating about 1/3 of our brain. When a 10-year-old child puts that radiating cell phone up to their brain, it's permeating the brain about 3/4 of the way through. And on a 5-year-old child, that is microwaving almost the entire brain. And again, folks, I know this is just scary stuff, but the message is not no technology, it's safe technology, and we know how to get you there. So because the industry owns mainstream media, we are so grateful when other well-known groups begin to do their due diligence on this issue. So one of those groups is the Environmental Working Group. And as a mom, I first learned about their efforts because every year they put out something called the Clean 15 and the Dirty Dozen. It's a list of produce that you could buy that is either really heavily laden with pesticides, or the part that you eat isn't as bad. And so if you can, buy the Dirty Dozen organically. And then, the Clean 15, you could probably get away with conventionally grown produce. So we are delighted that they have taken an interest in this issue and got funding to hire a PhD who's now working on the wireless radiation issue. And they have come up with some really good fact sheets. This one is protecting kids from wireless radiation in schools and at home. And this other one over here on the right talks about all this neurotoxicity. So know your audience. If you're going to share stuff with other people, this is a nice one to have in hand if you think that they already know who the Environmental Working Group is. So kids are not just little adults. They are especially vulnerable because they're still under construction. Their central nervous system is still developing. Their immune system is still developing. And we know scientifically this radiation does a number to our immune system. And their skulls are thinner and they have a higher water content. That's why this radiation is getting deeper into their brains. So we've got to protect our kids. So those are some of the long-term effects. And in the short term, a lot of people recognize the symptoms that we're going to go through now. And the good news is that they'll come back afterwards and they'll say, Cece, I did not want to know about this. I didn't want to hear about it. But dang it, I recognized some of those symptoms and I just took a chance. I created a sleep sanctuary and I turned everything off at night. And oh my gosh, my symptoms were so much better or gone. So it's important to recognize that the Americans with Disabilities Act for a couple of decades now has already recognized electromagnetic sensitivities right up there with multiple chemical sensitivities. So that helps to lend credence to this if you're opening the conversation with others. But insomnia is a big one. With kids, sleeping is what teenagers and children used to do best. And so many today struggle with sleep issues, and adults. Headaches, stabbing, searing headaches, migraines, nosebleeds, and even ear bleeds, fatigue, chronic fatigue, where you just don't have any giddy up and go anymore, and pain from unidentified sources. So remember how I said the industry used to spin this, that there's no mechanism of harm identified in the science, so let's just keep doing what we're doing. Well, aside from knowing about the cancers and the neurotoxicity and the infertility, now we know what's going on with the insomnia. The science shows us that, we are beings of light. We operate off of the light cycle on our circadian rhythm. And in the wee hours of darkness, our pineal gland in the brain is meant to release melatonin. Melatonin goes in and regulates our sleep and also helps the blood to clean up the toxins of the day and escort them out of the body. So what happens when we leave this invisible light energy form pulsating throughout our homes? Well, our poor brains think the lights are on. You and I can't see it, and the industry has told us enough about the blue light effects from our screens, but they haven't been completely honest and said the microwave radiation is another light form. So our brain thinks the light's on, it doesn't release the melatonin, and then we start harming our own body's mechanism that allows us to get proper sleep and to clean up the cell repair, right? So that melatonin is a big mechanism of harm. And then we have something called the Rouleau effect that messes with our blood. So when I first heard about the Rouleau effect, it made me think about the candy Rolos, that little stack of caramel chocolates. That's kind of what the Rouleau effect is, because normally when we're not radiating ourselves, our red blood cells free float and bring oxygen to all of our systems and organs, and we need that oxygen to function properly. What happens when we expose those red blood cells with this pulsation of microwave radiation that is an electromagnetic field? Well, first it starts deforming those red blood cells. So instead of nice little ovals or rounds, they're looking like bottle caps. And then they start magnetizing and glomming together. So they're not free floating anymore. They're stacking up like the Rolo candies. And then that stack can't get to where it needs to go to bring oxygen to all of your systems and organs. So that oxidative stress or reactive oxygen species are terms that doctors understand are at the root of most chronic illnesses. So the longer we continue to expose ourselves, it's cumulative. Some people say, gosh, I feel fine. I must be one of the lucky ones, but it's cumulative. So even if you're feeling fine today, tomorrow could be the day you hit that tipping point and the whole domino effect starts happening. So we know what's going on here. And our skin, some people will talk about the hot ear. Some people will say they're getting rashes or tingling or burning. And now we know that we have little antennas in the surface of our skin that help us to navigate safely throughout our world. If it's too hot, we sweat, and these antennas tell us to go get cool. Or if it's too cold, we get goosebumps, and these antennas tell us you need to go get warm. So they are in the surface of our skin. And what happens when we bombard them with microwave radiation? We get the hot ear, we get, heat flashes, we get burns on our skin, we get rashes, we get tingling. The gentleman who designed my Massachusetts for Safe Technology information cards lives one town over, and he's a graphic artist. Well, poor Chuck, his leg was going jiggity. And he goes to the doctor runs the test, they come up with nothing. Chuck starts researching what could cause the nerves in my leg to start doing this. And he discovers the microwave radiation, and guess where Chuck kept his cell phone all day long? Right where his leg was going jiggity. Chuck removes the cell phone and his leg repairs itself. And then Chuck hardwired his whole house and started protecting his kids. So skin abnormalities, biologically, we are electrical beings. All of our cells are whispering to each other with these electrical signals. And then our big, beautiful organs like our brains, our heart, our lungs, we do things like EEGs and EKGs and MRIs to measure the electrical circuitry in our organs and see if they're operating properly or irregularly. And so depending on your own individual proclivity, when you're exposed to microwave radiation, sometimes your heartbeat might go too fast, or you might be the one whose heartbeat is going too slow. So we just can't keep radiating ourselves and expect that we're going to always feel fine. And then this cognitive impairment and the anger and the behavior issues and the anxiety and depression and suicidal ideation. I will tell you, one of the most heartbreaking things at that EMF medical conference was when the doctors and scientists were telling us that if we don't get ahead of this, we are changing the gray matter and the white matter of the brain in the areas where we would have reasoned decision-making. And if we don't stop doing what we're doing, we can expect to see more of these anger outbursts in society, like we've been seeing more and more with these mass shootings and stuff. And I'll tell you, when we got back to school after the pandemic, and these kids had been issued a radiating device to be on for more hours than they were ever allowed, because mom and dad have to work, everybody's in lockdown, and these kids had many more hours of access and exposure with no safety training. In the Boston media, we had 3 different school districts in separate news broadcasts saying that children were wailing on their classmates with their tablet. They had lost the ability to control their emotions because we are biologically changing those areas of the brain. So we've really got to step up. There's no cavalry coming. We have to use our hearts and our voices and address this. And sorrowfully, it's not just you and I, it's everything on the planet. And you can go to this link here to gather science and stuff about this. I just added this link today. The Environmental Health Trust has now built a website that they've just launched called Wildlife, Wireless, and the Environment. You can get to it through this link too, but that's a really new, terrific resource for us. But all of our critters, just like you and I have in our skin, they have navigational features in their brains, magnetite in their beaks, that allow them to be synchronized with the Earth's electromagnetic field. And there's a Austrian gentleman by the name of Schumann who figured out how many times a second does the Earth pulse its breath. How many times does the Earth pulse electrons for every living creature to connect with? Turns out it's 7.83 times a second. That's called Schumann's resonance, and they measure it in hertz. So a hertz is 1 time per second. So basically about 8 times a second, we get this lovely, beautiful healing energy from the Earth. And then what did we do when we got so fancy with digital tech? We started sending signals in the megahertz range. Anything that says megahertz is pulsating spiked erratic microwave radiation 1,000,000 times per second. In the gigahertz range, they are pulsing us with microwave radiation at 1,000,000,000 times in 1 second. So we and every other creature are getting jackhammered with microwave radiation. So we have a very deep body of scientific literature showing what's happening. The pollinators, the birds, they can't get back home because we are dysregulating their navigation systems. And worse, these microwaves are especially harmful. And in the 5G, millimeter waves that 5G is adding into the mix, they're the same size as the poor pollinators. So we are just wiping out species after species after species until we learn better. And then energy consumption is a big deal. Anybody who's concerned with climate change should know that back in 2012, there was a Greenpeace analyst who crunched the numbers and said, if the cloud were a country, it would be the 5th largest country in the world on energy consumption. And that was 12 years ago. And look how much more we have allowed them to add in with technology since then. One of our colleagues is Katie Singer, and she does a lot of good reporting on all the other cradle to grave atrocities that happen to get the minerals, the dozens of minerals that go into every single one of our devices. If we truly understood what is happening with this, we would never just get rid of our device because they're dangling a shiny new one in front of us. We would use everything to its full and useful life, and then we would make sure we recycled it properly so everything gets reused again. So everything is consuming data, electricity, the data warehouses, the networks, our own devices. Streaming consumes huge amounts of energy, but once we know better, we can do better. Download it safely through a wired connection, and then you can enjoy it on your device without the antennas on. Sending and receiving, charging and recharging and recharging and recharging all of our tech. And then in the background, we've been talked into all the cool features of all these apps, but they're in the background using energy to do their constant updates too. So we need to have an honest moment with ourselves and say, gee, do I really use that app? No, let me get rid of it. Do I use that one? No, let me get rid of it. And just baby steps that we can start taking to use our technology mindfully, we can do huge favors for our planet and ourselves. So one of the things that was really just puzzling me is if this is as bad as little me can find in the scientific literature, surely somebody's got to have our backs on this, right? So I was so grateful in 2015 when Harvard Law School Center for Ethics came out with this free online 59-page report called Captured Agency, how the Federal Communications Commission is dominated by the industries it presumably regulates. And I went, oh, look at that graphic they put on their cover. It's a revolving door. And that's what our federal government has become in many of our federal agencies. is a revolving door between industry and who's running our federal agencies. So that was my missing puzzle piece. When I read Captured Agency, I went, holy moly, there is nobody protecting us. No cavalry coming. We've got to do this at the local level, bring it to the state level, and then push it up to the federal level. So about a year ago, ProPublica did another really good expose on this, how the FCC shields cell phone companies from safety concerns. And remember that $30 million government study that we did with the National Toxicology Program? It was commissioned by the Food and Drug Administration 2 decades ago. Those guys are all gone. They've long since retired or passed away, and we don't have anybody in our government addressing this. So the guy today who's in charge of radiation at the FDA is Dr. Jeffrey Shuren. And when you go and look at his background, you find that he is married to a woman who's a partner in a law firm that represents big Wi-Fi, big tech, big agri, big pharma, all these big environmental polluters. So he has a serious conflict of interest, and he should have never been anywhere near these studies. And he's done nothing to protect us. And sadly, we've learned that this goes all the way beyond our country, all the way up to the World Health Organization. Time and again, people will fact check us and go, World Health Organization, electromagnetic radiation. And the first thing that comes up is something saying, oh, the science is inconclusive, you know, and it looks wishy-washy. Look at the dates on everything, because now they have an active investigation. Now that the science has proven it's cancerous, they've opened up their investigation. They did one back in 2011, and they classified this radio frequency electromagnetic radiation as a group 2B possible human carcinogen. They knew enough to know we need to be careful with this, but we didn't have the animal studies that we now have today. So in that same group 2B category, we had tobacco, we had lead, we had thalidomide, we had chloroform, and a long list of other chemicals that our country still allows that other countries don't. And now that that science has been completed, leading advisors to the World Health Organization are now calling for this to be reclassified as a group 1 human carcinogen, if not a group 2A, which means they have to tell the public about it. But again, the corruption goes all the way up to the WHO. There are 2 groups there, the highly qualified experts, and then the industry unqualified experts who are pushing their agenda. And sadly, it looks like the industry group has gotten a hold of this program, and we'll know in the next year or 2 what happens to that. But so there's no cavalry coming. The corruption goes all the way to the top with these conflicts of interest. So that's all the bad news. Let's spend a little time talking about what we can do. So for your own devices in your own home, if you go and look at your router, your modem, you'll find there are Ethernet ports. All you have to do is plug back in like we always did, right? I was lucky. I still had a box of these Ethernet cables shoved down in my basement somewhere. So it's an Ethernet cable. Plug it into your router, and then on the other end of that connection, you can buy little adapters for your mobile devices, for your tablets, for your phones. There are different ones for different makes and models, but they're $20, $30. They won't break the bank for most people. But a lot of folks have multiple devices or multiple people in their homes with different devices, so they're going to need to hook up a bunch of stuff. There's a solution for that. It's called an Ethernet switch, which is this little box here. Just think of it as an extension box for electronics, and they're little. This one has 5 ports in it, so you plug one cable from the router right into one port, and then you get other little cables and adapters for each of your devices and plug it in, and then you're hardwired. So that's the first step. The second step is to go into each device, into your settings, and turn off all those antennas, because now your signal is going to go through the wire, and you don't need to be buckshotting all of your data and information out into the air where anybody with $100 app can snag it and steal your data. So the second step is to turn off the antennas, but with the way technology is going, the current push is for 5G and the Internet of Things. So with those things, every device they sell you, every electronic, every appliance, they want to put one or more of these antennas in to allow all these things to connect together and to harvest your data for profit. And perhaps some would say more nefarious reasons for societal control. So you have to measure because, for example, after I hardwired my house, when my daughter would come home from college in the summertime, she was doing swim lessons out of our pool. And she said, "Hey, Mom, can I turn on the Wi-Fi just to print out my swim schedule?" I said, "Sure, honey, go ahead, but be sure and turn it off when you're done." And then the following Monday, she's back at school. I'm sitting here in my office and I just don't feel right. And I'm like, why do I feel like the earth is sucking me down again? I had gotten a good night's sleep. I had eaten a clean organic breakfast. And I just felt something was amiss. So I pulled out my meter and it flies into the red zone. And I'm like, what the heck? And so I start scanning around my home office here. And it was my printer. But the little glow light that would show me that Wi-Fi is on was turned off. And I was like, well, that's weird. So I went and I looked up the manual online, and lo and behold, there's 3 antennas in that printer, and only one of them is connected to the glow light on the faceplate. So all I had to do was go into the settings and locate those additional antennas and turn them off, and then measure. And then it went back down to radio silence. So these little antennas are tricky and they're showing up everywhere and in force. So it's critically important that you either outright purchase an antenna, maybe see that your community gets one in the library, or go together with your loved ones and neighbors. A lot of people will do that, and then they'll just pass it back and forth as you get a new car, or as you get a new computer, a new TV, or a new stove. My stove, we kept our stove for like 25 years. And finally I was to the point where I had to, fan the door to get the flame to kick in. And so finally I gave up and my husband bought us a new stove, and it was a smart stove, and it gets delivered. And my girlfriend had built a new house, and so she had all new appliances, and we fiddled around with her stove and went into the settings, and we could find the radiation antennas because it had an antenna in it. We could find it in the settings and turn it off. I looked high and low in the settings of my stove. I couldn't find anything. So I pull out the manual and I find the RF exposure disclaimer, and it says, stay 20 centimeters away from this. And I'm like, what? That's like, I'm going to have to stand in the middle of my kitchen. How am I supposed to cook? I was like, no way. Homie, don't play this game. I don't want to be the thing cooking in my kitchen. So I reached out to tech support for the stove people, and they couldn't turn it off. And so they sent a technician to my home, and I showed him with my meter that, I'm usually at 10 or less of these microwatts. This stove is radiating my family at 1,090,000. So oh my gosh, is the right response. So this poor technician is standing next to me with his phone. And I said, so with what's coming off of your phone, this is the reading we're getting. And he said, well, fine, I'll go sit out in my van and call for advice. So he got a little hot under the collar, and he comes back in a while later, and he had spoken to one of the engineers, and all he had to do was pull off the back panel of the stove, and right behind the digital display is the motherboard. Right next to the motherboard was another little tiny board that held that radio frequency antenna. He just went and unplugged it. And I measured again, clean. So you need to have a meter if you can get your hands on one and share it, because these little things are sneaky and they're coming in everything. So if you really want to protect yourselves, you have to hardwire, you have to turn off the antennas, and then you have to measure. So that's what we can do to control what's under our control. And then we need to take a quick skim through the things that are not under our control. And we're going to give you my slides so you can drill down into all the, backup materials we've got in here, but I'll give you a high level overview of the things that we may or may not have control over. The first of which are these utility smart meters that Deborah talked about and has done such amazing work in Maui and inspired others all over the place. It used to be, so I'm one of 10 kids. We did a lot of hide and seek in my childhood. My mom was probably getting us out of the house, so we'd be all over the yard hiding. And I would be in the bushes, and to keep myself occupied, I'd be watching the little dials go around on the old analog meters that we had. Those were nice mechanical meters that lasted for 40 or 50 years that measured how much gas, water, electric, today it can be solar, propane, whatever energy you're using, those little dials went around and tracked it. And then somebody would walk the neighborhood, take down our reading, and send us a bill. That's what the analog safe technology looked like. And then we got fancy. And then the industry came into our towns and said, hey, you're paying those walkers a lot of money to do your billing. If you switch to digital technology, well, then you can just have a guy cruise through the entire neighborhood in a much shorter time, point his scanner at these new meters, get the reading, and do the billing. So what town wouldn't think that was going to be an amazing cost save? So that was the first step. And then they came in and started doing these smart systems. So on this wonderful brochure by Josh Hart, it shows with these smart systems, your house might be here. It's got a radiation detection meter monitoring your usage. It sends that data down to your neighbor. It picks up your neighbor's data, and then it transmits all that energy off to this house and this house and this house. And somewhere there's a collection point. So the further down the chain you are, the more microwave you're getting from the smart meter system. And then it goes up to the collection point that can then send it off to the utility. It can also be hacked because, again, this is all going through the air by thieves and terrorists. Thieves will be able to grab your data and see your usage patterns and basically tell, okay, hey, they're showering at 8 o'clock in the morning. And then look, they leave for the day. They can back up their truck and take your toys, right? So this smart grid is a raw deal on so many levels. And, you get everything hooked up to one grid. Guess what? Terrorists can just shut you down. And the CIA has been warning that this was a really bad idea. So these things, the industry will say, oh, these smart meters or digital meters, they only pulse a few seconds a day. So when I was preparing to testify before the Massachusetts Department of Public Utilities, I went into my dining room, and we have 2 electric meters mounted outside on the other side of my dining room wall. My husband really wanted a solar system, so we did that. That came with its own electric meter, and then we had our regular electric meter. So I sat there on the floor and I counted in 30 seconds how many times did that thing pulse microwave radiation into my home. And I did the math, and in 24 hours, 17,000 times a day, we were getting hit with microwaves. And I mentioned earlier on when we were talking about the headsets that one of the properties of microwave radiation is it amplifies with metal. So now these signals can hop on your house pipes and wires and travel all through your home, turning your home into a giant virtual antenna. Pulsating microwave radiation, creating dirty electricity on your system. And then there's just so many reports of these fires and explosions. These things are not properly grounded. And if there's a power surge, it can't handle it and it explodes. And now you've got a fire. And there's an honorary firefighter named Susan Foster who has worked with the firefighters on this issue. And she teaches us that when you have a chemical fire like this, you can't just call the fire department and they're going to come in and hose it, because as soon as they point that hose, they are at risk for electrical shock. They have to kill the electricity. So they've got to get in touch with the electric company, go through that process, to get all the electricity shut down, and that can take up to an hour. And what happens if the trade winds are blowing in Hawaii that day? Right? That's going to burn the whole neighborhood down before the firefighters can do their jobs. So these smart meters are a raw deal for our communities. And again, the whole privacy stuff. And when we were at the EMF medical conference, and I want to mention that conference is now free and online for you to go get educated further on the nuts and bolts of the science, and for your healthcare team to be trained professionally. It was online for 2 years for 24.5 continuing medical education credits. That opportunity expired in July, but Elizabeth Kelly, who organized that conference, has now put the entire thing online, 4 days of education for free. So everybody can get professionally trained. So at that medical conference, they said that when these smart meters go in, these digital meters go in, they see a lot more sudden onset of microwave sickness. And this is a big environmental justice issue. These industries come into these underprivileged, economically low communities where people are working 2 or 3 jobs just to keep food on a table and a roof over their head. And they come in and they put these toxic products in and then go, hey, look, it worked. National Grid did this in Worcester, Massachusetts, one of our largest cities. And then not only did they go way over budget and want to turn around and slap the ratepayers, the customers, with paying for their mismanagement, they turn around to New York and Rhode Island and Connecticut and say, hey, look, we were so successful in Massachusetts. You guys are falling behind. Get on the bandwagon. Let's do a smart grid in your state too. So the corruption just is at every turn. Jeremy Johnson is a Silicon Valley engineer, and he's married to a medical doctor. And Jeremy and his wife all of a sudden got really sick. You know, the headaches, the nausea, the anxiety, the depression, the insomnia, all this just slammed him. And nothing in her medical background could get to the root of it. And they finally figured out it was when a bank of smart meters went in on their condo that they just got walloped. So he does a really good TED Talk, and the TED Talks are only about 15 minutes. And then Dr. Alexia McKnight is a veterinarian radiologist. You know, her life's work is man-made radiation. And she didn't know that these low-level, non-thermal, non-ionizing exposures were dangerous. She knew about the ionizing radiation. That's why we wear a lead apron when we get an X-ray. That's why we don't sit out in the sun for 24 hours or, you know, expose our kids to the Earth's gamma rays. And so she's a radiology professional and had no idea about the man-made low-level radio frequency. Poor Dr. McKnight got one of these smart meters on her homes, and she became so neurotoxic that when she was out in traffic, she could no longer recall whether a green light meant stop or go. And it was a 50-50 dice roll, and thank God she got home that day. But, you know, all the other things, the headaches, the anxiety, insomnia, all of it. So she has done a TED Talk too. And it's interesting because they released the TED Talk to her to distribute, but they would not release it broadly. Because TED is technology and education. So they're walking a tightrope over there too. So our own devices, the smart meters, and then they're the cell towers that started in industrial parks like 300 feet up in the air, away from where we lived, you know, and then they started encroaching and encroaching. And now if they can paint it the same color as your building, they'll give a revenue stream for leasing that property to them. So it's critically important to look at the non-industry funded science. And what that tells us is that there's this death curve in the epidemiological studies. That was a new term for me. That means what is happening in society. That's what the epidemiological studies monitor. And there are studies that show adverse neurobehavioral symptoms or cancer in populations living at distances less than 500 meters from these cell towers. That's 1,640 feet. That's where that death and neurotoxicity curve starts to come down. It does not actually catch up to the general population till almost double that. So we should at least have 1,640 feet distance. And they're putting them right on buildings, right on the sides, on the rooftops. So we are in quite a pickle. There is a website that can show you where these big antennas are and the cell towers. It's called antennasearch.com. And if you type in any address in the US, then it will give you a return of a 3-mile radius and tell you how many of these big antennas and how many cell towers are mounted in your community. In my community, I live about 40 minutes out of Boston, and there's a couple hundred of them around me. I put in the address of the State House on Beacon Hill in Boston. 1,520 cell towers. 4,512 of these giant antennas radiating our world. And that's all within 3 miles. And these signals pulse for miles. So the electropollution that our major cities are under right now is just so toxic. And this is just one example of one street in Hyde Park, which is one of the Boston neighborhoods. Look how densified those cell towers are in this one zip code, right? So now we add 5G small cell antennas. So 5G just means 5th generation technology. It's not 5 gigahertz. That's a different 5G. What we're talking about with 5G small cells is 5th generation technology. And Deborah actually has a really nice video that she did called What is 5G and What Isn't? And that's just, I think, 6 minutes long maybe, but it's a really terrific overview that'll give you the gist of this. So the industry is promoting this, saying you're going to have faster entertainment downloads, smart cities, super highways, woohoo! Take a look at who's buying up the entertainment industry. It's these same companies that own the wireless industry, and it's a new revenue stream that they're promoting and making us think we need all of this, and we don't. And then it's not like 5G is going to come along and replace all the other toxic stuff we got going on. It's a new layer on top of the existing infrastructure of cell towers that we've got. So the industry and the FCC have pretty well auctioned off and monetized most of the wavelengths and the frequencies that carry a signal into where you are. Those are the longer wavelengths, the 3G and the 4G. They can penetrate a building, a tree, or whatever, and get to your devices. All that's left to monetize are these crummy little millimeter waves that are tiny, and they get disrupted very easily by rain or snow or trees. And they just can't go through objects. So now they have to bundle all of these different frequencies together to make 5G fly. So their goal to make their little signals get to your 5G devices is to put a cell tower at close range at bedroom height every 2 to 12 houses inside our neighborhoods. That is what 5G is, a cell tower outside of your home, so they can pulse their microwave radiation at you 24/7. And my town is now working on a tree bylaw, and I'm going to go to a meeting tomorrow night and let them know what the scientists in the radio frequency area are telling us about the trees and what we need to start protecting our towns with, because industry has been known to just come in and clear cut or just lop off parts of the trees so that their signals can get past. And anybody who's an arborist will tell you there are very wrong ways to do tree removals. And we're now at the time with climate change where our cities are starting to plant more trees to create a canopy to cool our cities in the summertime. And here we have industry coming in and just clear cutting them. So we've got a lot of work to do to teach our towns what the industry is up to. So this little clip here is a 4-minute clip that Environmental Health Trust provided from a congressional hearing up in Washington, D.C., where there was a commerce hearing, and there were 2 leaders from the industry there. And Senator Richard Blumenthal out of Connecticut, who had been a former district attorney, said to these 2 industry gentlemen, so please share with us, how much funding has the industry invested in independent peer-reviewed science to show that 5G was safe before bringing it to market? And these 2 guys hemmed and hawed and threw out some disinformation and ultimately were made to say, we don't know of any independent science that's been done to prove it's safe. So Senator Blumenthal said, so as far as health and safety is concerned, we're flying blind here. And that's how industry rolls. And then, insult to injury, Computer World and other, trade journals are saying 5G is a bad joke. We're not even getting the speeds that they're spinning up. We're getting even better speeds or same speeds with what we had already with 4G. So why do we even need 5G? It's just the next revenue stream for our industry and perhaps governments. But there went Verizon boasting, as they did their rollout, 200 million people will now have 5G. And this next link, be careful with it. I had a bill with my state representative, and then he said, Cease, I'm not bringing your bill back next session. I said, that's okay, because I'm not coming back next session because I'm so disgusted that we've known about this for so long and we have not protected the public. So then I ran into him at the farmer's market and I said, so Jack, why did you decide not to go with the bill next session? And he said, because you started talking about COVID. And I said, Jack, nobody is insinuating with the science that COVID-19 was caused by 5G. But if you look at the peer-reviewed science, you will see that in the areas where there were high electromagnetic radiation exposures, including 5G, there were higher case studies or higher case numbers of COVID-19 and higher death rates of COVID-19. And when you look at the science, the reasoning is very clear. Biologically, our cells only have so much energy. And if we have that well calibrated to get us through our normal everyday energy needs and our cell repair and regeneration while we sleep, when we layer on this constant microwave radiation, our bodies have a hard time cleaning all that up. And then when you introduce a virus on top of that, we have very little left in many cases to fight with. So normally a peer review would consist of 2 or 3 other experts in the field to guarantee that the science was done ethically and properly. Dr. Rob Brown, who's a radiologist, and Dr. Beverly Rubik, who's a researcher and a medical doctor, they had 15 or 16 peer reviews done on their paper before it was published. So this is rock solid. So if you talk to people who are working on vaccine safety or any of that, then that's an appropriate place. But be careful, because that may turn people completely off, and then they're going to throw the baby out with the bathwater. So this is what 5G looks like. This is what some of these little thimble-looking antennas look like. They're now hanging them on wires. They're putting them under manhole covers. They'll hide them behind facades. And they'll just stick them on existing cell towers. They did that in my town. They came in with an application for a cell tower that we've got to take down 3 antennas, and on the same platform, they just wanted to put up 9 or 12 other antennas. So they go into our town and say, oh, easy peasy, we're not changing anything really. We're just updating the antennas. It's going to be the same platform, same tower. And somebody tipped me off that this was going on with our planning board. So I went to the meeting and I read the application. Nowhere did it say new technology or 5G. So I said to Dan Klasnick, who is the attorney for the industry, I said, so Mr. Klasnick, please tell us, are you putting 5G into our community? And he said, yes, we are. So that's how they're getting it done. They're not even telling that that's what they're doing. So yeah. So Dr. Magda Havas is one of the co-chairs at the EMF Medical Conference. She taught electromagnetic radiation in Canada at Trent University. She is now a professor emeritus, which means she retired with honors. And you know, like in education, educators really never retire. They're still doing it, just not getting the same paycheck. Dr. Havas is still doing her work, and she has developed this global EMF monitoring project. Anybody who invests in one of these Safe and Sound Pro 2 meters, you have to have the same scientific device to do a study. So anybody who does purchase one is invited to be a citizen scientist, and she has protocols for taking measurements that we then enter into her database. So she can show us, can you brag about your community? Are you in the B, the blackout? Are you in the red, the R? Are you in the A, the amber, or the G, green? She nicknamed this her brag project. Can you brag about your community? And so we help to go take readings and put it into her database. So anybody who thinks that they would have fun doing that, you just grab a friend. One of you writes stuff down on the clipboard while the other is measuring, and you can help with the science. So that kind of feels good to give back on this as well. And if you are inclined to buy one of the Safe and Sound Pro 2 meters, if you reach out to globalemf.net, which is right here on the slide, then you can ask for the discount code. And I think it's like a 20 or 25% discount. And on a $400 meter, that's quite a nice savings. So wanted to mention that. And then just to give you an idea of what in real time this is looking like now in our electropolluted society, the goal indoors is to be at 10 or less. And that way, if you're out and about and you're getting exposed and you've got a clean enough environment to do your proper sleep repair, even if it was 1,000 outdoors, we could probably keep up with that according to the scientists. In New Hampshire, one of our colleagues up there measured, it was in the green. In Keene, New Hampshire, we're getting into the yellow. And now, since we took those measurements, they have turned on 5G in Keene. So we suspect they're in the red or the black now. And you know, town after town, we are in jeopardy. And then here in Boston, anybody who's been a tourist in our town probably found their way down to the North End. That's where all of our amazing Italian restaurants and bakeries are. But if you look, they also have people living right above the storefronts, and these pretty seemingly wrought iron looking, you know, lampposts are actually cell towers right at curb height where thousands of people go every day. And when we measured there, it was more than 500,000. And we want to be at 1,000 or less. And this is what most of our towns are starting to look like. And as Deborah mentioned, she did readings and colleagues did readings on different islands. And you can go and look and see what a typical street in a neighborhood is looking like. I used to live on Owl Street in high school on the island of Oahu. And after I moved away, they started putting these high rises up right on the beach. And I'm betting that they put cell towers right on top of those buildings. So it just breaks my heart. So that's all the bad news, you guys. Martin Luther King inspired us and said that when we make meaningful change, it comes through 3 channels. One, the public learns about it and gets engaged. And that's what we're hoping to inspire with our work, so that you have the facts to look at for yourself and then start taking baby steps toward securing your own technology safely, and then perhaps start working with everybody else in your community. Don't go right to the authorities. Sit down and watch the award-winning film Generation Zap together. It's most library streaming services now offer it through Canopy or Hoopla. Amazon Prime had it. I just found out today that in the US, they're no longer letting it be shown. But you can buy it for 10 or 15 bucks online too. It's easy enough to get. So the public gets informed, right? And then as a group, we go to our schools, we go to our town meetings and stuff. That was my hard lesson learned. Do not go it alone. I thought the truth would prevail. And all these public servants, they're public servants, they're going to protect us, right? Well, guess what? It's a rare public servant that is also a public leader. They're there to serve what you bring to them. And if you're just one voice, you're easily swept under the rug. So you need to get organized like Deborah did with her neighbors. And then they have a lot of people. So if you're busy one night, somebody's going to show up at these meetings and it's not all on your back. And it's much easier to share the excitement and the responsibility to protect your community. So every month we do these free public education webinars so you can learn a little bit, go home, make some changes, come back, learn a little bit more, get a little more inspired. So then it goes through the courts eventually, and then public policy catches up. So I won't go through everything in the following slides, but I'll whip through them so you know it's there and you can look at it on your own time and you can come back and ask questions. And we're going to do a Q&A at the end of this too. So remember when we said that the FDA commissioned this $30 million study that found clear evidence of cancers and DNA damage? That should have triggered public policy. Dr. Jeffrey Shuren, who's in charge of that, went to the FCC and said, we don't really believe this. Let's just keep doing what we're doing. Once he made that determination that they were not going to update the public radiation exposure limits from 1996 before we had any of what we're exposed to today, the FCC filed that determination in something called the Federal Register. Once that FCC determination hit the Federal Register that they're not going to change their limits, then the lawsuits began. Environmental Health Trust, Children's Health Defense, and others around the country started suing because there were 11,000 pages of evidence filed into the public record with the FCC showing extensive scientific, medical, and citizen evidence of harm. So when this court case was going on, these parties who sued did fundraising. It cost them $15,000 just to cull all the information and organize it and get all of this stuff printed up and presented in 27 big fat binders to these 3 judges. And the judges are looking at the science and the evidence, and they said to the FCC, so tell us, how did you determine that you don't need to update the 1996 exposure limits? And the FCC said, well, the FDA said it was okay. So the judges, of course, asked, well, where's the FDA's homework? And there is none. Not one of our federal agencies have ever investigated and done their due diligence on this. So the court in the Environmental Health Trust versus the FCC, it all got condensed in at Environmental Health Trust et al. They ruled that the FCC was, quote, arbitrary and capricious in holding on to those outdated standards. Basically, they didn't do their homework. And apparently, sadly, our courts don't like to tell our federal agencies what to do. They remanded it or sent it back to the FCC and said, do better. You need to account for the vulnerabilities of the elderly, of children, of electrohypersensitivity, of infertility, and the environment. And it's now been more than 2 years and the FCC has done nothing. So typically what happens is these sorts of scenarios take about 4 or 5 years to play out before anything meaningful happens. So there's no cavalry coming. There are many lawsuits that have happened over the years. We are watching a case very closely, a first in the nation in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, where Verizon put that cell tower on top of this neighborhood. And 17 children and adults got so sick they had to abandon their homes. And for the first time in the US, a board of health investigated. And they met with the scientists, they met with the doctors who had given these diagnoses of electromagnetic illnesses. They met with engineers who really understood what this radiation was doing. They met with industry to hear what they wanted to say. And they wrote this groundbreaking emergency order telling Verizon to come to the table in 7 days. Somebody else in the community had commercial property and said, hey, you can move your tower over here. We'll take that revenue stream. We don't care. We're nowhere near anybody's home or school. Verizon would not come to the table. Instead, they went and got to the courts and got an injunction against the Board of Health to remove that cease and desist order. Well, the Board of Health had already consulted with the state level Massachusetts Association of Health Boards and their attorneys and saw that they could take this to court a couple of ways, and sum total would be like $86,000, which for a town the size of Pittsfield, they've got that money set aside for emergencies, so it wouldn't have been a huge ask. Well, don't you know, instead of standing by their Board of Health that the mayor and the city council commanded to investigate, the mayor and the city council would not stand by their Board of Health. So the Board of Health was bullied into rescinding their cease and desist order. So now Blessed Children's Health Defense, they have come to the defense of these children and their families, and they now have a lawsuit, a civil suit against the town of the city of Pittsfield to remove that injunction and allow the Board of Health to do their job, because what they think they've figured out is that although that Telecom Act of 1996 says, you know, you can't sue us if there's any environmental whatever, all of that only applies to the application process and the siting of the equipment in the community. Once it's up and running and it's operational, if there is any nuisance or harm to the people or the environment, that jurisdiction is now the Board of Health. Legally, they have to fix it, and that's what they want to do. So we're hoping this lawsuit will be resolved in the coming months, and that could set a precedent to get the dominoes to start to fall. So, but we don't count our chickens before they hatch, because corruption is at every level, so we don't know what's going to happen. So lawsuits have been going on all over the world, and you can look into those. So people get informed and get active. It goes through the courts, and then public policy catches up. I told you that we have had bills in Massachusetts for 10 years that we've done good work on, but they've never converted to a law. When Rep. Abrami was told about this by his constituent, Deb Hodgson, he's an engineer who had only been taught you have to have heat to have harm. Deb and Rep. Abrami drove down from New Hampshire. We sat at my kitchen table for an afternoon, and we helped him connect the dots. He wrote an incredible bill. Why do Lloyd's of London, Swiss Re, and others not cover for damages? They already recognize this is a world-leading risk, right up there with asbestos and tobacco, and they do not offer insurance coverage. They put exclusions in their policies, which can leave our towns in jeopardy. Why does that legal fine print that we talked about early on even exist? Why is the FCC ignoring thousands of studies, and why aren't they looking at the non-thermal effects? And why do they allow 100 times more radiation than certain other countries? And why is nobody looking at the cumulative additive layering of all of these pulsations that we're getting hit with? So long story short, but in 7 months, we got this passed into law that they had to form a commission and spend 1 year investigating, and they did. And they came out with this groundbreaking report that's free and available online. I paid $50 to print this up because it's one of the most powerful things you can open a conversation with as you get organized and then start speaking to your towns. They document the conflicts of interest with the industry and our federal agencies, and they make 15 recommendations. Wireless technology is no longer advanced technology. We need to bring fiber optics or high-speed cable or copper right to the building, in our homes, in our offices, in our churches, in our schools, and then just pick up indoors with cabling. So fiber optics to and through the premises is future-proof technology. So lots of great information on bills, you know, other stuff in other states. You can be inspired by all of that. For the folks who are with us and are in Massachusetts, please stay tuned. By February 7th, all of our bills have to be reported out by their respective committees. So we're going to do some calls to action that will be very easy for you to just sign on or to click a button, and your voice will help to build the numbers, because it's a numbers game. If there aren't enough numbers speaking up, they've got thousands of other bills they need to be busy with. So the squeaky wheel gets oiled, and we can't do it ourselves. We need every citizen we can find to sign on to these bills. So you can look at that. One of the things the industry does when they come into our unwitting towns is they say, oh, here, this is going to be a great revenue stream for you to lease to us your properties to put all this equipment in. What town doesn't need more revenue? And then they'll say, oh yeah, if anybody says anything, those are just the NIMBYs, just the not in my backyard people. Nobody else cares about this. Well, when you go to Americans for Responsible Technology, you will see that there are more than 150 groups all over the United States who are working hard on this. And here in Massachusetts, all these different towns have been on it. And then the city of Boston has filed complaints with the FCC. They joined a bunch of other mayors around the country and sued the FCC. They didn't win, but how powerful is that to say that there are mayors who already recognize this? So it goes on and on. And our friends at Americans for Responsible Technology take the best of the best practices from around the country, and they create a toolkit that you can take to your town and say, what does our zoning code say? Are we protected? Here's a checklist. Have we got that in it? Here's a template. Let's hire a good attorney, because, you know, we have wonderful town attorneys, but they are way out of their depth with the telecom industry. You need to get a good attorney as a special counsel hired, and somebody like Andrew Campanelli, and you'll find a link to him in my slides. For $8,500, he will look at your town zoning code. He knows what the federal rules are. He will investigate what your state rules are, and then he will rewrite your zoning code. So where the industry says, oh, your hands are tied, there's nothing you can do, this is coming in, he's got a list of 24 things you can have in your zoning code that will make it very difficult for industry to just steamroll in. So many towns are doing that. So take inspiration there. And Easton, Connecticut, there was a grandmother who figured this out. She went to her local board. There was a doctor on the board who pieced together the science, and they now have a moratorium that they have re-upped now twice, that they will not allow 5G infrastructure in until it is proven safe by independent science. A team of our colleagues was brought into Stamford, Connecticut this fall, and we found out that the industry had gotten in the governor's ear, and the governor and the industry hatched a plan that their 5 top cities were going to be handed this package for rolling 5G out in the community, which is going to start putting these cell towers at bedroom height right in our neighborhoods. Well, Representative David Michel has been investigating this, and I did a lunch and learn with his colleagues some years ago, and he brought together experts to educate the city representatives, and they said, Governor, thanks, but no thanks. This does not look like a good idea. And by the way, the threat of a lawsuit is not reason enough to not protect our citizens, because that's what the bullies in the industry do. Say, you don't approve these applications, we're going to sue you. Our towns go lawsuit, and they roll over, and they allow all this toxic technology in. So you need to have a good attorney who understands this. And there's Deborah. You can go look and see all the incredible work she's done in Hawaii County on the Big Island. But this is happening all over the world. We just don't hear about it. So it's hugely intimidating when somebody says, guess what, guys? We are sitting ducks. So we could do a whole nother night on school actions, but just know we have countries that are taking tech out of the classroom because it's so distracting and kids are not learning better behind screens, and we're radiating them. So Silicon Valley execs, they send their kids to schools with no tech, and they make their nannies sign contracts that there's going to be no technology, no screens around their kids. Thank goodness for our friends at TechSafe School. They have built a whole program to help you educate your schools. And if you reach out to them, they will send packets of information to your school leaders. They've gotten some funding for that. And then again, don't go it alone. Get the other parents and the grandparents informed first. Get a group that is not going to back down until your kids are safe in school, and then go talk. And you can do this. We have every legal right to hardwire our schools, and it's not rocket science to fix. So Dr. Alexia McKnight did professional development at her children's schools in Pennsylvania. We've got a 45-minute program there. The Massachusetts Breast Cancer Coalition has worked with experts and come up with K through 12 curriculum for prevention on this. So we've got it all. We've got our little online course. We can train the whole school in about a half an hour. So lots and lots of resources. Same thing for the professions. The first medical school textbook just came out in 2023. How awesome is that? World-leading scientists each wrote chapters to teach in medical school what this is. And then Physicians for Safe Technology with Dr. Cindy Russell and other physicians. That's a nice website to send your medical team to get educated and have them go take that EMF medical conference. They can just start scheduling in little half-hour episodes from that conference on their calendar. And over the course of a couple months, they'll be fully trained. So for all of our professions, we just have incredible resources. So many people are do-it-yourselfers, many people are not. There is an entire industry profession called building biologists who are highly trained on mold, VOCs, formaldehyde, water. They can come in and do all the indoor testing, and there are those who have gotten their certification in electromagnetic radiation specialties as well. And here's that Film Generation Zapped. Who knew? PBS now has 2 half-hour episodes on this. And here's that whole toolkit that is at your fingertips with the facts, with the checklist for your towns. If there's no group near you, they have a whole toolkit for how to start a group. So it's all there. But our kids are big fans of monkey see, monkey do. We need to really check ourselves and model good behavior. And this is a great poster that reminds us, what can we do instead of just falling into the shallows of the screen? So that's fun. And then Clint Ober and Dr. Stephen Sinatra came up with an earthing book. There's a lot of science to show that healing energy from the earth really does heal us. Elite athletes use grounding and earthing. But I'm like, okay, I get the science, but gee, I live in the Northeast. I can't be running around barefoot half the year. So this amazing Dr. Laura Conover took it season by season and teaches us how to ground naturally. So use these resources, and we have lots of resources for our municipalities. And we know we can't kid ourselves. There is no safe level. Our goal is to get to as low as reasonably achievable, which is what the CDC, or Centers for Disease Control, uses for ionizing radiation. Create as much distance as you can. Spend as little time as you can. And if you can't get away from it, shield yourself. So those are the same 3 prongs that they already have for ionizing radiation that we should now be applying: distance, time, and shielding to this other man-made radiation. So we've got to work at the state level, at the local level, and then push that up to the federal level. Dr. Linda Birnbaum oversaw that NTP study, and she headed up. She was our nation's lead scientist with the National Institutes of Environmental Health Sciences. So there are still some good people up there. There's a lot of corporate capture, and we have to speak up and do our job to push it up. So we do these free webinars twice a month. We'll be announcing the February dates pretty soon. And we'll always have a safe place for you to go to access the information and do your own due diligence. Speaking about this publicly and teaching people is my happy place. So if you want to bring me in, I walked away from my tech writing career to do this work. So if we can ask for a speaker's honorarium, I'm very grateful for that. And I can walk you through that if that interests you, but I've never said no to anybody. It just helps because I should be helping to pad our retirement right now. But there are examples here where we have been brought in by towns to do these programs. And gosh, folks, we have got to get in there today and protect our kids. So start where you are. If you belong to a profession, your professional organizations are often looking for speakers for their local or regional or national conferences. I would be honored to be asked to do that. And so now that tech's here to stay, our towns really need to have committees addressing this. And they need to be on the wise end of the stick, that we at least have to have an opt-out, a no-fee opt-out on all of this smart technology so that people can stay safe in their own homes. And then we need to start making our way to hardwired tech. So here's the toolkit, here's the checklist. And again, our town should not shy away from hiring an expert who can really just get in there and do the dirty work for them and clean up their zoning code. So for today, remember, here's how we hardwire, measure it. Just start noticing. These are the baby steps. Start noticing what is radiating. Create a sleep sanctuary so your body has a chance to repair, and then start hardwiring. And put everything in airplane mode and only turn on the one antenna that you need at that time. Keep everything else off. And I just want to say, if you have an iPhone and you go airplane mode and you look down at the Bluetooth and the Wi-Fi, if those just say not connected, that's not good enough. They have to be off. So hit that button and turn them off. Not connected means they're still over there going, here I am, here I am, here I am, connect with me. They're just not connected. You have to turn them off to turn off the radiation. And use the resources. Environmental Health Trust has built so many great one-pagers, double-sided things, little postcards, all sorts of things that you can print for yourself on their resources page. So thank you very much. That was our long-winded 2 hours, but we don't expect that you would know all of this. We know it's like drinking water out of a fire hose. It's a ton of information, but now you have the lay of the land. And as your comfort level grows, you can drill down into what we've got going. And then you can reach out to Deborah at safetechhawaii.com or me at ma4safetech@gmail.com, get you to me, or either of our websites. So I'll go ahead and close out my slides. We're going to save the recording and mail it out to you guys in the next day or so. And we'll also send you my slides so that you can do whatever you want with them. Come back and revisit, share with others. But if there's any questions in the chat, or if there's anything that Deborah has seen come in, we can take a few minutes. I know, I apologize, we aim for 2 hours, but sometimes we go a little bit over, but we'll stay with you and answer your questions if that would be helpful.
Thank you, Cece. That was amazing. And I mean, getting those slides from you with those clickable links, I mean, what a goldmine of information. Thank you so much. I responded to, quite a few questions. Our chat was really active tonight.
Wow, 73. That's amazing.
I know. So there were a couple of questions about using different types of EMF protection and orgonite, shungite, and there's some EMF protection devices out there and so forth. And my opinion on that is that different things work for different people at different times. And it tends to be a very individualized thing. So, it's unfortunately, there's no easy answers. It's not like, well, this thing works for everybody when it comes to these, what could we say, like softer approaches, using these other kinds of protection. What I mean is other than hardwiring, right? So that's a little bit about that. There was
Yeah,
also,
and Deborah, I would agree. That's been my experience here too. So one product could maybe strengthen somebody's biosphere while it could short out the next person. So because you're a PhD in energy medicine, oftentimes if you know somebody or if you do muscle testing yourself, then your body will give you that feedback as to whether that particular thing is going to be helpful to you or not at that time. But don't kid yourself, folks. There's no safe level of microwave radiation. The first line of defense has to be to remove the exposures. And then when you're out and about, if you want a little additional protection, then look to the products. But be very, very leery of somebody who said, yeah, you can keep using this because cancers take years to show up. Infertility sneaks its ugly head in. Alzheimer's. How do you know that that's not what's happening while you're dancing around with your little device? So be very careful and do hard wiring as much as you can.
Yes, I totally agree with that. And layering, you know, I mean, I use many different approaches. And, you know, why not?
Yeah.
Because it's that kind of technology. There was a question about if I put my phone into a Faraday bag, you know, does that protect me? And I mean, the answer is probably, but it depends, because some of the so-called Faraday bags are better than others and more protective than others. And again, you know, as Cece said, you need to have a meter and test these things. Plus, if you're putting your phone in a Faraday bag, if it's really a Faraday bag, it's going to block the signal. And
Yeah,
that
so
means the
why,
phone's not going to ring and it's not going to message you. And so then what's the point? You might as well just turn the phone off, because then you know for sure it's not emitting. So that's sort of what I think about the Faraday bag thing.
yeah, we've gotten questions about, what about the phone cases that say they shield you? Well, okay, so now you put a piece of metal down the back side and maybe, and I do know somebody who's hypersensitive, and it allows him to hold the phone without it getting the blood clotting happening in his phone, but he'll only use it for short amounts of time. But you have to know that there's a risk. When radiation hits metal, it bounces back. So if you're holding it, here's your brain, you might protect your hand, but what about your brain and your heart and your thyroid and everything else? So when you're on the go, use the minimal amount of radiation you can. And when you have control in your own environment, just hardwire it. A lot of people got rid of their landlines, and that was the industry push to not have to maintain the infrastructure on that. But what happens when we lose power? Right? It used to be, we'd have a snowstorm here, we'd lose power for 36 hours, but my phone line still worked and we could call for emergency services if we needed it. And then the industry came in and talked our towns into getting rid of all of that and bundling it all together with phone, internet, cable. And when the power goes out, that all goes out. And now you're screwed. Right? You can't call for emergency services. If your phone, has died, what are you going to do if you don't have a backup?
Yeah.
So I
I've
would suggest getting your
tested.
landline back.
Oh, pardon. Yes, I totally agree with that. And the old-fashioned kind of landline, not the one that goes through like a VoIP or cable or something, because that's also dependent on electricity,
Yeah.
which the telephone company phone lines were not.
Mhm.
I've tested phone cases, some of the so-called, phone cases that are supposed to block, 99% of the EMF or whatever, and many of them don't work. They don't do what they say they're going to do. So
Yeah.
it can
So
just
again,
end
have a
up
meter
being,
in hand.
yeah,
Have a meter so you can measure, and then
can
you
end
get
up
your
being a
answer.
waste of money. There were also some questions about shielding, and you have to be really careful with shielding. I was shocked, several years ago when I saw that Amazon has started selling shielding online, and anybody can buy it with no warning labels, no instructions or anything. And it's really dicey to try to do shielding yourself, because you can end up creating a worse situation.
Mhm.
Because as Cece said, a lot of shielding has metal in it, and the metal will block the signals, but it also can create this ricochet effect if you end up having some kind of emitting device, on the inside of whatever you're shielding. Then it becomes like you're inside a Faraday cage, because the EMFs will just bounce around inside the metal shielding, And the situation gets amplified and can end up being much worse.
Yeah, and
So
yeah,
I
so
would
if you
recommend
can't
that
get
you
away,
don't do your own
yeah.
shielding, but that you hire someone to help with that. Sorry, go ahead, Cece.
I was just gonna say, yeah, that's where the building biologists come in, because they can really help you assess what's happening in your own spaces and then give you a report of their findings and then make recommendations for what you need to do. So yeah.
Yeah, yes, using cell phones in cars amplifies the EMFs for reasons we just described. A car is basically a metal box, right? Metal
Yeah,
on all four sides. And then when you're inside using your cell phone, you're drawing the microwaves inside, and then they just bounce around in there, turning your car into a mobile microwave oven with you on the inside.
yeah, elevators, airplanes, metal tubes, baby.
Yeah, I think somebody had their hand raised. Where did you go?
Karen?
Karen
Oh,
Fitzgerald.
wait.
Yes, that's me. Okay,
Yes,
can you hear me? Hi, thank you. Thank you
we
for this
can.
presentation, Cece. I saw you presented to our group in Greenland, New Hampshire
Oh,
with
yeah,
Leighton and that whole group.
yeah.
And I just wanted to let you know that Representative Pat Abrami is running for the state Senate in New Hampshire. You may know that or not. He's my ex-husband.
Oh. Somebody
It
told me that his ex-wife was there, but I didn't know who it was.
was me. It was me. But I'm really glad that he's working on that with you. And I don't know if you want to be in touch with him about his Senate run, because I know
Yeah,
that, you know,
I was in touch with him when he was thinking about running and he was doing all the groundwork to see if it was advisable for him to run. So I am just thrilled, and I pray that he gets back in. He is the state representative who did this. And he is, I don't know what he was like as a husband, but as a public servant, he really does the right thing. And they're few and far between. And, he said to his friends in the industry when they're saying, "Hey, Pat, what are you doing?" And he said, "And they are my friends." But I said, "I think there's something we need to look at here." So he's not afraid to be truthful in the face of these powerful industries. So
well, and he's about to become a grandfather. So I think that that's another.
oh,
Yes. So
well, congratulations. What a great chapter for you guys.
thank you. Thank you. And I just wanted to let you know that in case he can take this out again on a Senate run, So
It's going to take a lot of grassroots education to get that Senate to do anything on this. Senator Denise Ricciardi has been trying, and they just shut her down at every turn. So we've got to get the education going at the grassroots level so that our legislators know that they have to pay attention to it. So anything I can do to help with more education sessions up in New Hampshire, just keep those wheels turning and let me know.
okay. Thank you so much.
Thanks for saying hi, Karen.
Sure.
There's another question that was just typed in, and the question is, have any communities stopped smart meters recently?
Yes.
And where are they, these
In
communities?
Maryland. So Maryland has, I think, one of the nation's largest water districts. And the experts were brought in there during the pandemic. And they ultimately decided they were not going to go forward. They were indefinitely postponing their water meter rollout program. So it can
Smart
be
meter for water metering.
yeah, and if you go to, Deborah's got a lot of great resources on her website, the Environmental Health Trust. You'll be able to get through a lot of that in my slides.
All right, and then we have a lot of thank yous.
Oh, thank you, everybody. And Deborah, thank you.
Deborah, can I say something? Cece and
Sure.
Deborah, this is Kathy Ging. I want to say that last night, 7 of us from Families for Safe Technology, that used to be Families for Safe Meters, we went to the EWEB, Eugene Water and Electric Board, which is the largest publicly owned utility in Oregon. And we had the first opt-in in the country, although some people say that Hawaii had it. We had it a few years before Hawaii, but they totally co-opted us. And now they're trying to put in the last 30% of the smart meters that aren't installed. Well, we had 7 people show up, so I want to tell you that it will be on YouTube, and all of the Eugene Water and Electric Board, called EWEB, videos are on YouTube, I believe, and also eweb.org. But what I wanted to say is Second thing is Dr. Martin Paul, who spoke to Eugene to a standing room only audience in 2018. He lives in Portland, Oregon. He told me about 10 months ago that he has a record, a breaking news, a new paper that he wrote that he can't get published, and he wants to do a Zoom call. Well, Roger, who's the biologist from Portland, and Shane Riley, who's a EMF tester, goes around to people's houses. They were supposed to orchestrate Paul talking through Environmental Health Trust, and that didn't happen. So, Cece, you might want to pick up on it and get Dr. Paul, because he says he needs to get this very important information up. And the third thing I would just say is that Dr. Paul told me that what's happening with the electromagnetic frequencies is that the electric frequencies tend to stay at the top of the skin, but the magnetic are the ones that penetrating in and can affect the organs. Now, it was Magda Havas speaking to a group in California about 5 or 6 years ago who said that the CIA had declassified documents in 2010 related to a 1975 and 76 studies done in Eurasia showing the harm that can happen and that the organs of rabbits and rats, etc., had been affected. Dr. Paul spoke with Barry Trower from England in it kind of ticked me off. I mean, it got me my buzzer going to work on this stuff too. But they said beyond certain harm being done to your body, there's no reversal of those symptoms. And finally, I will say that I've been a real estate agent for 37 years. And I was one of the first ones to have a cell phone in Eugene, probably about 1982. I'm sorry, 1991 or 92. And then about 7 years ago, I essentially stopped using it. But I had started to get a little strobe light in my part of my brain. And it was actually kind of fun because I was part of the whole 60s and 70s, hippie area and all that.
So you liked the strobe light in your brain?
Yeah, it was like, this is really weird. This is great. Well, Dr. Paul told me that that was a sign that I was about to get epileptic fits. Yeah, so this is a real life story. This isn't urban legend or anything.
Yeah,
And
I know of more than one real estate agent that wound up with the glioblastoma brain tumor because you guys are on your phones all the time.
Inside vehicles mostly too.
Yeah.
And
But
building
I do
as well.
disagree, Kathy, because I've been able to reverse my EMF symptoms, and so you can reverse some symptoms. I just want to put that out there.
Right.
I'm a living testament to that. I have another meeting in 5 minutes, and
Okay.
Doreen has her hand raised. Doreen?
But listen, one last thing. Dr. Paul said it's beyond a certain limit that you can't reverse it. That's what I wanted to clarify.
Okay, thank you.
Nice meeting you. I've always
Thank you,
wanted to-
Kathy. It was nice to see you in
Bye-bye.
person-ish.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for the presentations. I have a question. Do you know of any meter that would measure 5G radiation? For example, if someone is near me and they have an iPhone and I have my acoustimeter, it may not pick up. But how do I know 5G is not radiating out?
So there's a couple of different ways to answer that. One is there's no safe level. So 5G does not operate unto itself. So it's still got to use the 3G and the 4G levels that your acoustimeter is going to pick up. So
Oh.
you're going to know if you're getting exposed. So you probably don't need a 5G meter. Safe Living Technologies, which makes the Safe and Sound Pro 2, has come out with a good 5G meter. I think it's, I don't know, 800 to 1,000, depending on the accoutrements you get to go screw on it. But what we're learning is that I had one to test and I saw a 5G small cell, up the road a bit. And I went over there and I wasn't getting anything off of it. Either it wasn't turned on yet, or I didn't have the manufacturer phone that matched the manufacturer's antennas on that pole. So they are saying, the industry is saying that it's only going to be activated when there's a device that's making a call for it. But Eric Windheim, who's one of the building biologists, has been doing some testing out in the field, and he says that does not appear to be true. it seems like those are blasting signal, whether anybody's looking for it or not. So you're probably okay for now, Doreen, with the equipment that you have.
Okay, so the 3G and 4G, if I'm not picking it up from the iPhone, then probably 5G is not being used.
That's probably true.
Okay, and I had asked the question too, for example, I mean,
Wait, Deborah knows something else she wants to
Well,
share.
I don't know if that's a safe assumption because, I mean, just because the meter's picking up like the 4G, 3G isn't really even used anymore.
Well, they repurposed it into 5G, I think.
Right, but just because the meter is picking up the 4G LTE or maybe 3G, you can't then assume that there's no 5G.
Right. No, I'm sorry if I misstated that. My
Okay.
point was, 3G and 4G signals are the backbone for 5G. So I don't think at this point, they may be inching their way toward it, but at this point, I don't think 5G can operate on its own. It still needs these other frequencies to find that device
okay,
that uses 5G. So those frequencies are going to be blasting, and then the 5G antennas theoretically would go on.
Okay.
So I don't know if it works the other way, that only the 5G antennas would be on, in which case you might be exposed and not know it.
okay, thank you. I'm very rarely near any radiation. I don't have a cell phone, but we have a functional question here. My husband uses an iPhone, and given our situation, if I needed to reach him in an emergency, he has his cell phone on, and you know, if he's out and about. What is the best way for him to somehow still receive a call, but be protected by having his phone on? I can't figure that one out.
Maybe start inching toward as low as reasonably achievable. So turn off the Bluetooth antenna, turn off the Wi-Fi antenna, turn off the locator and the hotspot and whatever else is other than what you need to communicate with
To
your husband.
reach him, yeah,
Yeah.
because it has to somehow be on for him to hear.
Mhm.
Yeah, so because we tried to think there's not a way to encase it, because then he won't hear the emergency
Right.
call.
Or
Yeah.
it'll cut the signal and then the phone won't work.
Yeah, or it's in the bag and it's got to work harder to
That's
keep
right.
that connection. So now you're exposing yourself to more radiation potential
Yes,
because it's got to pull it at you before it gets to that bag.
yes, and you know, my last quick question is, I have very severe electrical sensitivity, and I'm just wondering, when I go out, which is not frequent, but when I drive, I can really feel a lot of the radiation from a tower, from whatever nowadays. I don't know of a good way to protect myself better in the car. I don't know if there's a way.
Yeah, some people will wear a hat or a vest or something, but again, you know, nothing's 100%
A
proof.
protective hat or vest.
Yeah, that
Which
has the shield.
they do make, you know, EMF protective clothing.
Yeah, it hasn't worked for me. I was
Yeah.
just wondering if there's something else,
Yeah.
but thank you so,
Well,
so.
you can try the, you know, the Q-link pendants and the biogeometry and, you know, things like that. Yeah, but
Yeah,
it's an experiment.
yeah, on
Thank
everybody.
you so much for all of your time, both of you.
Yes,
Oh,
thank
you're so
you.
welcome, and we're grateful that everybody joined us, and we hope you have a tech safe
And
evening,
one
everyone.
last comment. Hey, listen, do you
Kathy,
know,
yep.
you know about the key machine that the young guy from Germany invented about 12 years ago? It runs up to $5,000, but it can cover 7 houses in a neighborhood. And 3 of his devices protect from 5G. The 4th one only protects from 4G. Are you familiar with it? It's not the CHI. I think it's called the QI. Does
QI.
anybody know about the key machine?
I am not familiar with that, and I don't know anybody who has had electromagnetic illnesses and can testify that that has protected them.
I
heard
am familiar with it, and I know a couple of people who use it and have been protected by it, but
Thank
that
you.
doesn't mean that it will work for everyone, and
know
it's a heck of an
Umani
investment.
Deborah, do you know Umani Groves? She helped stop the cell tower in Ashland, Oregon.
Yeah.
She made Hawaii. She's a good friend of mine, but I thought that she said that she may have used one down in Florida. But you can get one for your house. It's like about 3,500. It'll go like 1,500 feet. It does
Right.
electricity and it runs on a torsion field. It needs to be recharged in 5 years, but they will recharge it for free if you pay the postage. But the one that goes around several houses is another 1,500 bucks, like maybe 5 or 6.
Yeah, it's just a lot of money. And
you know,
give
you know,
Unmani a hug for me, okay?
but they need to make it in this country. There's too much money for me too, but
Yeah,
several
yeah.
households got together, and if we could find out if it's bona fide, the guy in Utah who started funding it, his wife got out of bed. She couldn't do cooking or cleaning or anything after he put in one of these devices. Supposedly, she was able to function as a human being. I don't even think she had the.
Well, that's encouraging. And you know what that reminds me is at the EMF Medical Conference, Dr. Magda Havas did a series of lectures before the conference on EMF basics. And I think the last one is about some of these other technologies that are being developed. So that might be worth going back and watching again. And it's free and it's online. So that might answer some of those questions, or she might be a good person to ask about that.
What was the name about that?
Dr. Magda Havas
Oh, I
did
know. But what was the video?
pre-conference lectures for the EMF Medical Conference.
Okay, I'm sorry, I was talking when you were. Say the name of the conference again.
EMF Medical Conference
It's in the chat.
2021.
Okay,
It's
so put
it's
it
in the chat.
Thanks a lot. Great. Yeah.
Kathy, you keep dematerializing and rematerializing. It kind of
Yeah.
fits with the
Well, that's
strobe
okay.
light
We
and
gotta go.
everything. Yes, we do.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody.
All right, everybody. Have a good night. So nice of you to join us.
Bye. Love you.
Aloha.
Bye-bye.